Yes. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first session of the ELTT Online Seminar. Dear listeners, dear followers in our YouTube channel, on our Google Plus Hangout group, this is the first ELTT webinar run by the sustainability team at the University of Zurich, Switzerland. My name is Clemens Mader. I will moderate this session. And I'm very proud to welcome our two distinguished guests in this online panel. On the one side, Dr. Alexander Leicht, and on the other side, Professor Ibrahim Abuleish from Egypt. The ELTT program is a one-year blended learning professional training program targeting actually people at higher education institutions. And we are focusing to enable those university educators to take leadership in transforming teaching for sustainable development at their institutions. ELTT is the abbreviation for enabling leadership for transformational teaching and learning for sustainable development. And at the University of Zurich, we have tried to launch this program together with partners to enable university educators for transforming their practices in education and teaching at universities. The whole ELTT program entails 8 open source webinars. This one is the first of it, and handouts, as well as 8 workshops at the University of Zurich. And the open source webinars and the handouts, I say they are open source, so they will be distributed. They can be watched and followed all over the world. And also the handouts will be able to use all over the world for workshops at universities. The program runs in international partnership with international organizations, as such the Copernicus Alliance, which is the European network on higher education for sustainable development. It is the International Association of Universities as a global university network, also striving for sustainability in higher education and for higher education development as such. Then the RCE Service Center at United Nations University, the Institute for the Advanced Studies for Sustainability at UNU, and the Global University Partnership for Environment and Sustainability run by UNEP. So those are our international collaborations, and through those networks we'd like to actually distribute and disseminate our webinars and the handouts to the global community of people who'd like to strive towards sustainability in higher education. The ELTT program would not be possible without some funding, and so it is funded by the Sustainable Universities Program, which is an initiative by the Swiss Academy of Sciences and the Mercator Stiftung. So today, the first ELTT webinar actually focuses on the impact and relevance of global programs for sustainable development and education for sustainable development especially, and how these global programs actually also impact local institutions, like higher education institutions at the local scale, but all over the world. So just a week ago, actually, in end of September 2015, the UN General Assembly has officially accepted the Agenda 2030, including the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, as a follow-up also of the Millennium Development Goals. And that have been, those Sustainable Development Goals have actually been developed through a very participative process, which started at the Rio+20 Summit in Rio de Janeiro 2012. And in 2014, in November, the UNESCO took balance of 10 years UN Decade on Education for Sustainable Development. This UN Decade ran from 2005 up to the end of 2014. And has launched in November in Aichi, Nagoya, the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development. So those are 2 global partnership programs initiated by UN and UNESCO, so to support sustainable development in a society globally, as well as really focusing also on education for sustainable development and supporting education for sustainable development. So in this ELTT webinar, actually, we'd now like to discuss the relevance and opportunities of those global programs, and especially for higher education institutions, as you are probably watching from. So the main questions will be, what is actually the role of higher education institutions in global ambitions towards sustainable development, as like those programs? What do specific goals of the SDGs and the Global Action Program mean for higher education institutions? And how can local experience and knowledge from science and practice actually find influence at a global scale? As live followers, you are also invited to bring in your questions through the ELT LinkedIn discussion group. To discuss those questions, actually, we have invited two, as said, very distinguished guests in the ELT webinar. And I'm very glad to welcome our two guests. On the one side, Dr. Alexander Leicht, Director of the ESD program, UNESCO in Paris. He has led the UN Decade on ESD to wide implementation of ESD international policies, as well as thousands of initiatives also globally that came up through this UN Global UN Decade on Education for Sustainable Development, initiatives that have launched at local scale by NGOs and raised awareness for sustainability through formal and non-formal educational practices. Now, Dr. Leicht is actually also leading the process of implementation of the Global Action Program on ESD at UNESCO in Paris headquarters, and the main aim of mainstreaming ESD into policy and practice globally at UNESCO. On the other side, we have Professor Dr. Ibrahim Abuleish in Cairo, Egypt. He's the founder and president of the Heliopolis University for Sustainable Development, which is a university, a young university located in Cairo, Egypt. Since the 70s, actually, Professor Abuleish is promoting sustainability through growing business initiatives in organic food, cotton, and pharmaceutical product development, closely connected all of those to social initiatives like healthcare, education, culture, and art. For his ambitions, Professor Abuleish has also won the Alternative Nobel Prize and many other awards globally. So Heliopolis University is fully dedicated to enable students actually and researchers to build competencies and innovations for sustainable development. So this was just a short introduction to our two distinguished guests and speakers on our panel. And now actually I'd like to start our discussion with the first question to Professor to Dr. Alexander Leicht. So the first question actually to Dr. Alexander Leicht is the Global Action Program on ESD aims at the structural implementation of ESD at national policies. What's the relevance of this goal actually, and how can higher education institutions contribute to achieve this ambition? So this is the first question to start our online panel, and I'd like to Dr. Alexander Leicht, now from UNESCO Paris, to start your introduction. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Mada. Thank you very much, Clemens. Thank you also for inviting me and inviting UNESCO to be part of this panel and of this first session of the course. I think it's a very good opportunity to share through this format here a number of our consideration with regard to driving education for sustainable development at the global level. I would, in the 10 minutes that I have, I would briefly address in the first part of my short talk the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development generally. What is it trying to do as a global policy framework for ESD? And in the second part of my short contribution, I would discuss the implications for higher education. And then I understand later on in the session we have further opportunities to develop that further. Let me start by the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development. As you indicated, the Global Action Program builds on the UN Decade of ESD that for 10 years, from 2005 to 2014, tried to implement education for sustainable development at all levels of education across the world, with one emphasis on integrating ESD into policies, but another big emphasis on generating action on the ground in schools, higher education institutions, research institutes, etc. The decade came to a close at the end of last year. We produced a big assessment of the decade, the final report on the UN decade that you can download on our website. And that final report, into which a lot of research went, concluded that a lot of action has been achieved, a lot of successes have been achieved during 10 years. In fact, in 2014, we were with Education for Sustainable Development in a very, very different situation compared to 2005. ESD was much more visible, was much more visible across the world and more deeply embedded into policies. There were a couple of concrete success stories. For example, we have identified in our research that leadership at the political level, but also at the institutional level, is one crucial indicator of success for education for sustainable development. And there have emerged through 10 years of work on the decade a number of really strong ESD leaders, you could call them, or also good practitioners, you could also call them. However, despite the various successes, the UN Decade Report has also concluded that there are, of course, major challenges still to be addressed. We are still a very long way away from integrating education for sustainable development at all levels of education and in all areas of policies. And in particular, there were three challenges that the final report indicated that would have to be addressed in the future. One is a closer alignment of the education sector and of the various other sectors that are dealing with sustainable development issues. That obviously has clear implications for higher education. I will come back to that in a moment. The other big challenge that was identified is that we need a stronger institutionalization of education for sustainable development. We did see a number of good integrations into policies throughout the decade, but this did not happen across the board. So we need a stronger move away from individual good practice initiatives and towards an institutionalized integration of education for sustainable development. Also something, of course, that has implications for higher education. And the third area was we need stronger research and monitoring and evaluation on education for sustainable development. On the basis of these findings of the decade, UNESCO member states consulted. You know that one of the strengths of UNESCO is that we directly work with member states governments, and so can ensure that really their perspectives from across the world are taken on board. But once they have signed up to a program, we also have a certain legitimacy to call upon them to implement the program in their countries. So UNESCO member states have come together and agreed on the follow-up framework to the UN Decade, the so-called Global Action Program that you have mentioned, and that is intending to scale up ESD actions now initially for a first phase of 5 years, again in all areas of education and learning, of course with one specific focus on higher education among other areas of education. We have identified 5 target groups, or we call them also priority action areas: policy, education institutions, teachers, trainers, educators, youth, young people, and then local communities. These 5 areas or 5 target groups are considered the priorities for the next 5 years for ESD action. And in these areas, we are trying to generate not only a lot of action on the ground over the next 5 years, but also try to make sure that education for sustainable development is properly institutionalized, properly structurally integrated into into work at the member state level. As UNESCO, we are at the global level driving the implementation of the Global Action Program together with a group of around 80 dedicated partner organizations that we have identified. We identified them when we were preparing for the big World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development in November last year, where the Global Action Program was launched. And from the work towards this conference emerged 80 strong institutions, from United Nations partners through member states, governments, to individual NGOs, or also global networks. The International Association of Universities that you mentioned is one of our, we call them key partners for education for sustainable development at the global level. But then, of course, the on-the-ground implementation of the Global Action Program is really the responsibility of every member state, and not only of every country, member states as we call them in UNESCO, but also really the responsibility of every education institution. And here is where I, for my last couple of minutes in this first intervention, come to the role of higher education. Higher education, of course, is considered by us, by UNESCO, as a key driver for sustainable development, for education for sustainable development, but then also for sustainable development more generally. Higher education institutions are, among many other things, those institutions where the future leaders of a society are trained and educated, so they have a very particular power to leverage action, higher education institutions. Then another reason why higher education institutions are central to the whole effort is that they are situated often at the intersection of education activities. They are teaching institutions, but they're also concerned with the wider sectors in charge of sustainable development. They often carry out research in sustainable development related areas, and I'm sure when we listen to Professor Abulash later on, we will hear how that works in very concrete practice. So this intersection between education sectors and sustainable development sectors is another very crucial contribution higher education institutions can make to driving education for sustainable development forward. And then a third reason why higher education institutions are considered crucial for the implementation of the Global Action Program is the following. When we reviewed the decade, we found that the so-called whole institution approaches, integrating education for sustainable development across the many different aspects of an education institution. These approaches have been particularly successful throughout the United Nations decade. So we agreed together with our member states, together with the countries we cooperate, to put an emphasis in the Global Action Program on whole institution approaches. This is the second priority action area that I mentioned, the focus on education institutions, and we call upon them, we try to encourage them, and we also try to support them through advice to, as an institution globally, as an institution overall, to move towards sustainable development. That means sustainable development should be integrated into teaching content, into teaching methodologies, but should also be part of the campus management, should also be part of the wider community outreach of the higher education institution. That means cooperation between, for example, the university administration and local NGOs that work in sustainable development. So I think with this, I've tried to just mention a very few items how higher education is relevant to education for sustainable development and to this big global framework that our member states have put in place. And I'm sure we will later on be able to develop that further. So thanks again for the opportunity to participate, and thanks for the chance for this first intervention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander Leicht, for your introduction here into the UNESCO programs and the emphasis that you give into higher education for sustainable development also. Now in the second round, I'd like to actually ask Professor Dr. Ibrahim Abulash for his contribution, and the question actually for you would be the Heliopolis University, its vision is actually that Heliopolis University is a pioneer is a pioneer scientific establishment that strives for sustainable development of individual consciousness, economic solidarity, social justice, and an environmental balance in Egypt and the world. So can you please shortly introduce how this link between local and global impact for sustainable development shall be achieved? So on the one side in Egypt, but also on a global scale. And how the global UN programs, as like the SDGs and the Global Action Program, are relevant for your institution. So these are the questions for you, and I'm looking forward to your response. Thank you very much. Just a second, sorry. I'm just recognizing that your microphone is not on. Can you hear us now? You can hear us, but I can't. Sorry. Yeah, now we can hear. Yes, now it works. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, dear Dr. Clemens Mader and Dr. Alexander Leicht. Thank you very much for your introduction. Of course, I'm living with all the UNESCO ideas since even 70s, and perhaps it was also one of the inspiration why we started the education for sustainable development at the schools here. And now, since some years, we have opened the University for Sustainable Development, Heliopolis University. But how we are doing that, we decided to open 3 faculties. The first is engineering. And we decided to teach the undergraduates 4 main courses. The one is water. Our globe, especially Egypt, are suffering very much from the water scarcity. And that is something that does not exist in the country on the undergraduate level. And then, you hear me? Plums, yeah? And also energy, so renewable energy. That is very, very needed overall in the world. And the green agriculture, a green architecture. And of course, one of the most important intermediate course is the mechatronic. Those are needed in the engineering, and all the people working in the renewable energy needed as an intermediate activity. Now that is the engineering. The business and economics, that is our main interest. The main interest, because you know, young people have to learn from the first beginning how to do ecological and ethical businesses. And that we emphasize that very much on the curricula we developed for both engineering and also for business and economics. The students are doing that in groups and in many projects. And the third one is pharmacy. And in pharmacy, we emphasize very much on pharmacognosy, where students have to learn how to produce medicine out of the nature, out of plants and nature in general. That is how we create a group of young people who will lead in the country and have learned what does it mean sustainable development. On the other hand, our education in Egypt, as many countries, is very poor. So the students, when they enter the school here, they are not much capable and skilled. So we have created a course for them. We call it the core program, where we train the young people in first in sustainable development, and what does it mean? What is this sustainable development? And so the 4 dimensions of sustainable development, every student has to understand it. Not by lecturing it, but by doing it. So they are working on fields to understand the meaning of sustainable development. Of course, they have to learn languages. So they different languages, but mainly English and German. And to build their enthusiasm for that, they learn arts, different type of art, also culture. So all the 4 type of art, they enter the university by learning art, to open hearts for the problems, to open hearts also for all what they perceive from the nature, that they can be engaged, not only knowing, but also enthusiastic for solving problems. Of course, they learn also social sciences and innovation. And one of the most important courses is the leadership. They have a leadership program where they have many training and professors who accompany them in leadership. And then what is very important is to learn more about nature and society. How nature is composed, how society needs their support. That is in the second part. In the third part of the university, we emphasize very much on research. We have one of the oldest in the country research centers where we research on renewable energy. We do research on how to desalinate water, how to use water efficiently, properly, because of the scarcity of water. So irrigation, how to do it, how to create a community in the desert, and that is on the one hand. In the other hand is in the pharmacy, how to solve health problems in the society, and how to educate people through research. So, you know, through doing research we can't do alone. We are very much connected with the RCE, you know, the Regional Center of Expertise, and with the universities around the world. So this integration and this cooperation with many institutions around the world helped us to create solutions for the problem. Newly, as example, we created a very efficient solution for this, where people much died here in Egypt and everywhere else, from the bacterial resistance. When people have bacterial resistance, they cannot react with antibiotics. So how to help them? So we created a new, medicament, a new drug. And on the other hand, we have drugs for the problems in the country here, like diabetes and hypertension and all of that. The research center is doing that. On the other hand, agriculture. On the other hand, how to help people working in the sustainable agriculture to raise the fertility of the soil, to make the symbiosis between the different, to create the diversity in the ground. And we are, of course, since we existed in Egypt since now 37 years, we are using the biodynamic method of agriculture. And it proves that we are sequestering more CO2 in the earth, in the soil, than any other conventional one. So that is how we can help mitigate the CO2, that is the climate change. That is the best way to contribute to the climate change effort. So now we are creating a new faculty of organic agriculture here in Egypt, but we already now training the faculty member, and it will last for perhaps another 2 years on our fields here in our farms to let them experience the difference. So we have started doing research on showing what is the difference between biodynamic, organic, and even conventional, and this research will show them how the advantage of doing biodynamic agriculture on sequestering CO2 and on so serving the climate. On the other hand, through research, we have a lot of programs in the society. So gender equality, as example, by doing gender equality program, we helping also alleviating poverty, because the young ladies and girls, when they are involved in many businesses, that they create more wealth and more understanding of life. And many other projects, but even the most important one is that all the students are having practice. Practice, that means they do internship in only such companies in the world who are caring for sustainable development. And that is where we're facing, of course, a problem, because there are not many. And my question to my friend now, they sang, how can we activate those member states, the minister, to encourage the sustainable development education? You have here an office in Cairo, UNESCO, and we ask you to let them come and visit us, to cooperate with us, just to educate all these beautiful member states, also our university in here, because they are living in another world. Sustainable development is not an issue for the ministers. And my next question out of what you said is the teaching methodology, and of course the campus, how we created the campus, a green campus. We have created a green campus, but the teaching methodology, that is one of still of our challenges, because all our faculty members, they came from many other universities around the world with no idea about sustainable development. So we need actually support in this regard. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Aberlech, for your insights also into how your university, which is definitely an international outstanding example of a university striving for sustainable development, works. And you have already also brought some insights into your understanding of quality education, or how actually a good quality of education should look like, by including and involving students actively into also research activities, and by having a very interdisciplinary understanding also of education. Now, with your questions, Professor Aberlech, and also my question to Dr. Leicht would be now actually how the goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals is on quality education, and how do you describe the interrelation between quality education and education for sustainable development? So is education for sustainable development standing also for quality education? Please, Dr. Leicht.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, quality education has been really a catchphrase over the last years, and maybe even 20 years even, at the international and at the national level when it comes to describing what we want in education. You may know that under the Millennium Development Goals and the associated Education for All goals, so that were basically the global framework for education work from 2000 to 2015, there was one goal on quality education. However, the way it was often interpreted was to make sure that students receive a good basic education that enables them basically to read and write well. So it was a relatively limited understanding of quality education. It was also often associated to training teachers well, so that they are able to make sure that the basic skills are there with students. However, what we now see in the global education discourse, really, with the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically Sustainable Development Goal 4 that you refer to, is a shift in the understanding of quality education. And I think the shift, without wanting to simplify too much, I think the shift can be described in the following way. We now concentrate much more on an education that is really relevant to the individual lives of the learners and also to the wider societal context. So we're really moving towards an emphasis on education that matters, really, a relevant education that matters for the individual and for the society. And very specifically, we see this enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education. And within that goal, in the target 4.7, you know, there are a number of targets under this goal and various means of implementation. And the so-called target 4.7 really specifically speaks about education for sustainable development, educating for sustainable lifestyles, making sure education contributes to the promotion of human rights, gender equality, the role of culture in development, global citizenship, etc. And this is really one of the maybe really the first time that beyond a very specific education for sustainable development global framework, but in a wider global framework, education for sustainable development and associated issues have been very explicitly recognized, because they are seen as the education for sustainable development and associated agendas are really seen to be standing for an education that is relevant, for an education that matters for the individual life. So I think we have a very strong shift here in the understanding of quality education, and really, without wanting to overstate it, but I think we can really say that we're moving towards an alignment of the understanding of quality education and the understanding of education for sustainable development that we have been promoting throughout the decade and the Global Action program. I think another aspect of this of quality education today, and UNESCO has been very vocal about this. You know, we have been promoting a Sustainable Development Goal for quite some time now. We organized the big education summit in Incheon in Korea in May 2015 that looked at the wider education agenda after 2015, and another very important emphasis there was that quality education needs to be holistic, needs to encompass all areas of life and all areas of education, all types and areas of education, not only formal education, but also non-formal education and informal education. And then also another important link is that quality education needs to be an education that is done in a, you could call it in a humanistic spirit, that is really done to the benefit of the development of the individual and of the wider society. I think that's why we can say at the moment relatively optimistically that we have a relatively strong alignment, or we are moving towards a really strong alignment between the understanding of quality education and the contents and the methodologies that Education for Sustainable Development have been promoting for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Leicht, now you brought into very well actually what the understanding of quality education is, and I think also it linked very well to what Professor Aberlesch has introduced before. And now actually the question to Professor Aberlesch would also be, how do you understand here quality in higher education, and how do universities need to change to improve their quality towards education for sustainable development? And I'm just looking again here to, I think your microphone, Professor Aberlesch, needs to be turned on again. Yes. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Clemens. Yeah, that is the real challenge. We have first to educate professors, faculty members. Mm-hmm. Now we have a program at the Sustainable Development Center at the Heliopolis University where we train teachers. We train teachers according to a program we created together over 3 years with many universities. Perhaps Dr. Alexander, you have heard about it, this EduCamp project. And our teachers are now training the teachers of the country. We have, we just heard now for the last week that we have the duty to contribute to 10,000 of the teachers. That is the very important point, how we train the trainer, the teachers. Without training them, there is no way to let them teach also this education for sustainable development. And actually, we don't need many tools. We only need mindset and to have a new way of thinking. And our people have created magnificent ideas. Very simple. We don't even don't need schools. We don't need buildings. In very poor countries, we need trees where we can sit under the tree and learn much about sustainable development. In higher education, we do it now here in Heliopolis by ourselves. All the faculty members might have to accompany a group of the core program where they got, I think for the first time of their life, everyone knows about sustainable development. But in depth, there is no one knows. So what is this? How are the four parts of sustainable development working together? And actually, you must be an artist to take all the four spheres in consideration while you are teaching. How we let them first move and dance and sing, that this innovation or creativity can be seen, which is very needed to teach sustainable development also for the young student. That is the main challenge. And of course, Dr. Alex didn't answer my question about how we can generate interest in the member states, how we can activate our minister. Because if we do it alone here in Heliopolis, that is one university in the country. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aberlesch. I think one issue was also that on the one side there is this bottom-up movement coming from single universities to raise awareness for sustainable development, and on the other side there are these global policies that should also raise awareness among politician makers. Is this actually also the way, what you think, Dr. Leicht, in how to raise awareness among ministers in countries, or how can actually ministers become more aware about to implement sustainability into their education policies, national education policies?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to respond also to Professor Abulei's very relevant question about how can we activate, how can we mobilize governments and specifically education ministers here in this context. I think there's no sort of magical formula how we can quickly do that. How as you know very well, has dedicated really a lot of his life to this issue. But I think there are a couple of strategies that we can pursue together. And the first one is certainly the one that you and Dr. Mada just pointed out. We can work together on the one hand from the ground up with very good practice projects, and we should not underestimate how much an individual good project, how much an individual can achieve if their example is really properly showcased at other levels. And this is, I think, one of the contributions we can make at the global level to make sure that the good individual practice reaches those who then in the end make the decisions with the wider implications. And we do that within our means, within our limits, but we do that through in a very practical way. That we collect good practices from across the world and showcase them on our website and in publications, but also in our individual meetings with government representatives. So that's one of the very concrete ways how we can slowly build up awareness and slowly build up the willingness to do something about education for sustainable development. And then, of course, it's also always, and of course, for UNESCO, it's a very natural thing. It's also very helpful to have a global framework that has been, or a global policy document that has been adopted by every member state. And of course, it's very true that when a global framework at the UN in New York or UNESCO in Paris is adopted by governments, that does not necessarily mean that the individual government or the individual member of the government or employee in a ministry knows about this policy instrument or feels committed to implementing it. But it's nevertheless a very good advocacy tool that we have to say, look, your country has signed up to this framework, be it the United Decade, action program, the development goals, and in a way, in maybe a soft way, but nevertheless in a political way, your government has the obligation to do something about it. As I said, I think it's, as you know much better than I do, it's a long process, but I think nevertheless we have a couple of strategies in our toolbox to facilitate this process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dr. Leicht here, also to respond on this. It was very helpful. We can now actually shift forward to looking into the questions that came in by our listeners, and I have here one question by Mrs. Förster. The question is, how do you train, going to Professor Abuleish, the question, how do you train leadership to cope in challenging environments? You mentioned connecting to yourself, to heart, to nature as important. Do you use experimental-based learning or art-based learning methods? So what methods actually do you propose or do you use at Heliopolis University here for training leadership in challenging environments? Please, Professor Abuleish.
Yeah, first, connecting to nature. Learning out of the wisdom which in the nature. That is how young people have, young and even elder, how to understand leadership. So very much connecting to the nation. And to the social problem, how if we show them or let them see the problem of the society, how do they want to contribute in group to solve a problem? So leadership is almost an action. It is not something what he learned by only theoretical, but by actions. He is in the field, in the society, and also learning the wisdom in nature by many, many examples. It is a long course.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Aberle. And I think as we are running to the end here as well, we can now also come to our final round of questions. And this would just be a short impression into saying what are actually your recommendations to a person teaching and researching at universities. So what you would do from your perspective, either from a higher education institutions like Heliopolis University, as well as from a global perspective from UNESCO. What would you recommend to a person teaching and researching at universities? Maybe Dr. Leicht, would you like to start with this?
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Well, listening to the great example of Heliopolis University, I could just say, look at what Heliopolis University is doing and try to replicate it and try to put it into action in your context as a recommendation to a teacher. And that's certainly one of the things I can say, is to look at all the good work that is being done across the world and try to get inspiration from it. But to answer in a maybe slightly more general way, I think it's very important for teachers first to talk in the classroom, really independent of the subject that they are teaching, to talk about what matters to their students, what matters to the students' individual lives, and what matters to the students in the sense of the society that the students are a part of. Very specifically, this would certainly mean then to talk explicitly about big sustainable development challenges like climate change, for example, or poverty across the world. So talk about and address what matters. Second item is, I think, take your students seriously. Let students engage in the search for sustainable development solutions. Let them take action. Let them understand what it means to solve a problem and find the problem themselves. There's no clear final answer to sustainable development issues. Everyone needs to be engaged in the search for it. And the third recommendation is look beyond your individual work, look beyond your subject area, make linkages to other subjects, make linkages to what your colleagues are working on, and make linkages to what is happening in your local community outside of the walls of the education.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dr. Leicht. And now, Professor Aberle, maybe to you also the same question. So what would you recommend to teachers at universities how to engage for education for sustainable development? Please, Professor Aberle.
Look, my experience, not talking now about theoretical aspects, but my experience is every professor had to be engaged in research. But the main research activities is taking about 80% of the time of the researcher. They don't have much time for education. Mm-hmm. So it is now created at Heliopolis that a lot of people are working more in research, very little in education. More and the other are very more in education and very, very little in research. But we bring them together in the research meeting where they hear and learn about the research, not only results, but even the process of research. And then they are so fertilized, fruiting from each other to learn. There is no education without research. There is no, you can't repeat your lectures over years until you have to see what is going on new, and that is research, means how to discover the future. But let me ask my friend, Dr. Lecht, two questions. A proposal for you, Dr. Lecht. What is if the UNESCO is creating awards for the member states who are doing their work, encouraging them to do it? Also, award for the minister, award, and it must be published globally that people can seek for taking the award. Yeah, and the second one, that is, I'm asking you to create so training course for the faculty member who don't have any idea about sustainable development. Not only Heliopolis, many of the professors in all the country, they don't know what is this. And I think this initiative must be taken from the UNESCO. You make it in Egypt, or I know that you are living in Paris, so that people can then go here and learn how to teach sustainable development, especially at the university. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Aberlesch, and of course we'll give the opportunity to Dr. Leicht to respond to this question. Please, Dr. Leicht.
Okay, so thank you. And I know we're at the end of our session, but very, very briefly about the award. And in fact, it's true we don't have an award for governments and for ministers. But what I'm very happy to report is that we do have. We started this year actually. We just started this year. A big new global award for education for sustainable development. The award will be given out in November for the first time. The 3 winners, each one will receive $50,000. So it's quite a substantial UNESCO award. And governments and ministers can certainly be nominated, but not only government and ministers. So we also have among the winners NGOs or individual practitioners. But it's certainly an effort from our side to improve visibility at the global level, to generate some action. So that's what I can say about the award. And it's a very important issue about the faculty training. What we're trying to do at the moment is to provide material for that online, and we're also trying to find resources to, in fact, together with our partners, try to offer such a training for teachers, educators, faculty members on the ground. And it's certainly very, very important reminder from that faculty are really in a university to be properly equipped.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right. So, thank you very much, Dr. Leicht, also for responding to this question, and of course, Professor Aberlesch also for your valuable input to both of you. And we are actually now at the end of our first ELT online webinar, and I'm very glad it worked out very fine. And we had two very distinguished and wonderful guests here in our online panel with beautiful insights into, on the one side, institutional activities on education for sustainable development at Heliopolis University for Sustainable Development, and at the other side by Dr. Leicht from the UNESCO ESD program on how UNESCO actually promotes education for sustainable development, now also in the new developments of the upcoming Sustainable Development Goals. So, dear audience, thank you very much for your participation, either live or now after this live session. The session will be recorded and will be online also for further time. So, thank you very much, everybody, and looking forward to meet again online or physically. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Clemens. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.